The second war with Voldemort never really ended, and there were no winners, certainly not Harry Potter, who has lost everything. What will Harry do when a ritual from Voldemort sends him to another world? How will he manage in this new world in which he never existed, especially as he sees familiar events unfolding? Chapter 1. Part 1. He felt the cracked cobblestones crunch under his boots as he made his way down the street with a slight but noticeable limp. Thankfully, his feet didn't make any sound, as the nearly tattered dragonhide boots he wore were spelled with silencing charms. Those took forever to get spelled since dragonhide was highly spell-resistant. The cloak he wore was probably black once, though now it was tattered and stained brown with mud. There were spots and patches of discoloration all over the cloak, results of spells the cloak had taken over time. His eyes moved over each building as he walked down the street, and his observant gaze took in each one before it moved on. One eye, large and clearly unnatural, turned and moved around, independent of the other eye. It was constantly looking around and scanning the areas around him. The eye wasn't his originally, but it certainly belonged to him now. Conveniently, after his eye had been lost, they'd still had it laying around in one of the trunks. At one time, he had thought that the eye on the right side of his face had spawned the nickname Mad Eye for the original wearer. It wasn't until Alastor Moody had confided in him before he died that Harry discovered the truth. The Mad Eye nickname had nothing to do with the enchanted fake eye. Moody had earned that nickname not long after he had graduated the Auror training program. One of his early partners had given it to him because of the manic look he'd get when dealing with dark wizards. Though he used to be called Mad Eyes. When he lost the eye, they just made it singular. Moody had further confided that the Auror who had given him that nickname had died in the first war with Voldemort. Harry had always thought it morbid that he was using it now to replace his own eye. Even if Alastor had died a few years earlier, it still seemed somewhat gruesome when he stopped and thought about it. Truth be told, though, Harry didn't think about it much. It wasn't like it mattered anymore. Harry kept his wand in his hand and was slowly and casually twirling it in his fingers as he made his way down Diagon Alley. Less than a decade ago, it had been a bustling hub of shops and shoppers. Now, as he looked around, it was a ghost town, literally. He could see the hazy forms of ghosts in some of the burnt-out husks of buildings that remained. Magic itself sustained the charms that kept London non-magicals from noticing the presence of an empty town right in their midst. His eye flitted over stores he remembered. There was Ollivander's store. It had been destroyed by Voldemort early in the Second War. Harry idly remembered the man's silver-eyed, piercing stare. The confusion and non-comprehension when Ollivander had told him that the wand that chose him was the brother of the wand that gave him his first scar. Of course he still had the wand, though he didn't use it often. It was in a second slot inside of his wrist holster. His eyes moved past other stores. Nothing remained of Quidditch-quality supplies. His memory flicked over the Nimbus 2000 he had seen in the front window during his first visit to Diagon Alley with Hagrid. Madame Malkin's still had a mannequin standing where the window had been. Of course, that was the only thing standing. Harry remembered being there for his first fitting and his first conversation with Draco Malfoy. He shook his head, freeing his mind from the memories of those figurative ghosts. They didn't matter anymore either. Harry could feel Voldemort's magical presence somewhere ahead of him. It was coming from the general direction of the site of the former Ministry of Magic. Strangely, though, he couldn't feel the presence of any of the dozen or so Death Eaters he had left. A frown crossed Harry's scarred face as he continued down the street. He wondered what Voldemort was doing there. There was nothing left except the rubble of the giant building that had once stood there. He knew Harry and a handful of others had spent 3 weeks combing through the rubble. All that was recovered was bodies. He wondered what brought Voldemort out of his hiding place this time to resume their game of cat and mouse, because that's what it was now. What had started as a war had come to an unlikely end on Halloween when Harry was little more than a year old. The war had begun anew in Harry's 14th year, when Voldemort had arisen in a new body in part thanks to blood from Harry's own body,